This is Frankie Lynch, astrological consultant. FrankieLynch.com, at Frankie Astro on TikTok and Facebook, at Frankie Lynch777 on Twitter. So anyway, I wanted to say a few words about relationship astrology because that's one of my specialties. Anyway, I just moved here to Colorado from California, and I grew up in warm weather. And so this is very strange for me. I look like I'm back in California right now because it's nice and warm in here. So for now, anyway, relationship astrology. One of the ways I got good at astrology was by having lots of crappy relationships. You know how it is when you start getting into astrology, especially girls sometimes, boys too. We start getting crushes, and then we start looking at charts. We try to find out people's birth times. And when we do, and we have these deep crushes, we try to make it work every which way. We make the orbs wider than the Grand Canyon. We bring in every asteroid from the Kuiper Belt, right? But then you live and you learn. You tighten up those orbs, and you learn to love yourself and, not try and find your value through others. I always say one of the most important things, at least that I've learned about having a fulfilling relationship, is you always have to be willing to walk away. The moment you need anyone, you are screwed, right? Anyway, so relationship astrology. I love this quote about love. Robert A. Heinlein said, "Love is the condition where someone else's happiness is integral to your own." Think about that, right? That all of a sudden is disarming when someone else's happiness is just important to us as our own. Yeah. But that's where relationships often go awry. Yeah. When both people aren't similarly invested. So that's why we look at synastry and composite. I'm just going to go through a little rundown of typically how I do a relationship reading. It might be interesting. So the way I think of relationships in general is they're like psychological collisions, right? We sort of crash into each other, press each other's buttons that we didn't know we had, right? It's like parts of our charts lay dormant until someone comes along and activates them, right? I mean, how does attraction work? Perhaps we become attracted to a friend or someone we work with. Or perhaps we see an interesting stranger pass by. God forbid you're with someone else, right? Why is it that some people think you're wonderful and others can't stand you? Sinistry, right? I don't think of astrology as causal, but, correlative, where we can see the correlations. So you can do a relationship reading for anyone, not just romantic relationships, but with your kids. You could do your pets if you had their charts. You could even do with cities or countries. You can do with celebrities and famous people, but I always tell clients it's sort of fruitless because really it's just hypothetical. You only get real information when a relationship's already started. Even when it's a crush, it's sort of like, again, hypothetical. Relationship readings are only really useful when the relationship has began. You could look and be like, "Oh, I see red flags." But I always say any aspect, no matter how bad it is. And so, I'll look for some things in particular, but anything can work as long as both people sincerely want it to and sincerely love each other. So anyway, how do we start a relationship reading? I start it much like a natal chart reading. I'll analyze both partners' charts individually just to get a sense of them as individuals. I might look at their moon phase and get a sense of their temperament, right? And we'll have to talk about temperament in a different video. I'll look at what sort of aspects dominate in their chart. Do they mostly have a Mars disposition? Is it mostly Uranian? Is it mostly Plutonian, Saturnian? That usually tells us something about their general disposition, what kind of person they are. And I'll look at the other things too, and just get a general sense of them overall. And then we start the synastry part. Now, synastry is what most people are familiar with when it comes to relationship astrology. The word synastry is a Greek word, or at least an amalgam of them. Syn meaning together, and aster meaning star. So literally, to star together. Right? You can think of a relationship as sort of starring together. When we have a relationship, it's like we create a new entity, so to speak. It's really funny because I always say astrology is a tool, number one, for self-discovery and self-awareness. We become aware of our unconscious patterns and learn how to live a more constructive and harmonious life. One way we do that in particular, right? Self-discovery can happen through inner inquiry. It can also happen through relationships on an outer level, right? As I said, we crash into each other and we push each other's button, awaken dormant parts of each other's charts, and then things ensue, okay? So relationships are a primary place we find ourselves, aren't they? Anyway, synastry, to start together. What we do with synastry is take each individual's chart and overlay them on top of each other in what's called a bi-wheel. Bi-wheel, pretty obvious, two charts in a wheel, right? So what we do first when we look at that is we see what houses one partner's planets are falling to for the other partner. So the house person will typically be viewing the planet person a certain way. And the planet person will be feeding that particular planetary energy to the house person. So for example, one of these ones I love to see is someone's Venus falling into someone else's seventh house. The seventh house person will see the Venus person sort of like an optimal partner, marriage material, quite attractive. Right? The Venus person will feel quite attractive and pretty because they feel noticed by the house person. The house person helps them feel more attractive in the relationship. So we'll do these overlays both ways to get a sense of how the partners interact. Now, when we look at synastry, we also have aspects, right? The aspects between the actual planets. Now, one thing with relationship astrology is we still want to look at dignity. We don't have time to go over dignity here, but it means how strong a planet is. A planet in its own domicile or sign of exaltation is dignified and therefore stronger. If it's in the opposite sign of detriment or fall, it's weaker. So the stronger planets usually indicate stronger relationships or easier aspects, whereas the more difficult dignities or the debilities, as they're called, will indicate perhaps more difficult parts of the relationship. So the aspects. Now, what kind of orbs do we use? Well, people go quite wide. I used to go quite wide. You want everything to work, but the aspects that really count are 5 degrees and below. The ones that are really strong are 3 degrees and below. Those are the ones you really notice. So for the most part, right, people love to see trines and sextiles and all these good, easy aspects. But if it were all trines and sextiles, it would be quite boring and we would never grow as people or develop, right? And as we were saying, a primary way we grow as people is through relationships. I've learned the most about the signs by being in relationships with them. So we look at the aspects. We need squares. We need oppositions. Relationships need healthy friction. We need some dynamism. We need some healthy tension. If we didn't have these sorts of difficulties, we wouldn't learn a lot about ourselves, would we? So there are some aspects that I really sort of look out for as quite difficult. Pluto square or opposite Mars. Typically, one person feels trapped. It's sort of similar to another one, which is Saturn square or opposite Mars. So the Mars person will often feel confined, trapped, imposed upon. Yes, that there's these rules one needs to follow. Put in a box. Mars needs freedom. Mars needs to let off steam, right? That's why Mars loves the night and being in night charts. He doesn't have boundaries like in the day. So that's why I say these are quite difficult, because the Mars person in both circumstances will take it, right? And then all of a sudden, typically explode one day. It'll turn into these power struggles and power battles where the Pluto person tries to impose its own vision or tries to dominate the Mars person. And Mars doesn't usually enjoy that. Saturn will try to impose rules, perhaps. It will have expectations. It can be critical in relationships. Mars will eventually rebel. These same things, too, can add sexual friction and sort of a healthy sexual desire and make things quite interesting. Everyone thinks, Mars trine Venus would be so wonderful in Sinistry, and it is. I enjoy it. I usually end up being the Venus person. I want to be the Mars person, But the difficult thing about it is that we get to know each other very well, very quickly. Which means when it comes to coitus or intercourse, I don't know what words I'm allowed to say on here. When it comes to intercourse, right? We learn how to make each other climax quite quickly. So things can get formulaic and perhaps a bit boring sometimes. I've had people say, well, how can sex be boring? Well, if you're like me and you like to make it a whole big kinky event, well, then yeah, it can get formulaic, as I said, repetitive. So one has to watch out for that. Mercury is super important. Seeing good aspects between Mercury, Moon, the Moon, right? Mercury's communication. Communication is one of the most important things in relationships. I always maintain. Things can be overcome, difficulties can, by shared communication and honesty. Yeah. The other thing is the moon. The moon is so important because the moon, it's our unconscious, right? It's our sense of security, our moods, our fluctuations. It's very emotional, isn't it? When you have Saturn, Pluto, or Mars making a hard aspect to the moon, someone's emotions get trampled, don't they? So those can be quite difficult. Pluto aspects, these are some of my favorite in general. Trine Venus is so hot. I love it. They can also get quite obsessive. Pluto moon aspects are so hard to disentangle ourselves from. Typically, we can't break up, or it's very hard, right? One person goes into stalker mode when the other person moves on. So, But synastry isn't the only thing we have in relationship astrology. I think of it more as all the component parts, or perhaps the ingredients, right, that go into this wonderful relationship meal. And so the next course is composite charts. So how do we derive composite charts? We take the midpoints from each partner's chart, and then we derive a new chart from those midpoints. It's sort of like the natal chart of the relationship. There's also Davison charts, which some astrologers prefer, and you take the midpoints both between time and place, right? So some people say it's more accurate. I prefer doing just the regular midpoint, just regular midpoints between the planets. Simplicity is elegant, isn't it? So anyway, like I said, it's the natal birth chart, or if you will, of the relationship. So what do we look for in this? Well, this is how the relationship itself unfolds. Again, we still look for dignities, yeah? But some interesting things happen here. For example, the sun conjunct Venus is one of the best aspects you can have. In composite, it's quite loving, right? It's love, as Robert Hand said. It's love, it's sweetness itself, it's recognition. But you might see Venus opposite the sun. Can that happen in real life? Well, no. We know that Venus is never more than 48 degrees away from the sun, right? So we would read that as Venus conjunct the sun. The houses planets fall into are quite important too. We can see difficult houses accentuated, like the sixth house. It could mean enmity and conflict, or it could mean mutual support and nourishment. The eighth house could mean secrets and deception, or it could mean investigating deep together, needing to share each other's trauma, the most intimate details, what was hidden from each other and yourselves. So you can also see the fourth house accentuated, where there's a sense of wanting to build a home together, feeling at home in each other's company. Or perhaps it's the 10th house and one feels like a power couple. Or the 11th house might be accentuated and you were friends at first, or you feel like best friends in each other's company. The other thing that's quite important are the aspects in composite charts, of course. We look at Venus first. What's she doing, if she's doing anything? What's her dignity? Is she happy? Is she in exaltation in Pisces? Is she in fall in Virgo? Is she in domicile, perhaps, in Taurus? Or in adversity or detriment in Scorpio? These things will be important in determining how the relationship unfolds. We might see things like Moon Mars, right? Which could be quite hot. Or in composite, it could be one person picking and critically poking at another person, taking them apart. Aspects to the ascendant are so important in composite charts. Again, it's about recognition. And the ascendant is sort of interesting because on the one hand, it's appearance and attraction. On the other hand, it's the soul in your body. So it can represent being supportive of life direction. These are just some examples of how synastry and composite can work out, what it can look like. So I hope you have a better idea. The wonderful thing about my relationship readings is there's always a positive side. Right? There's always hope. The important thing is communication, honesty, and actually loving each other. You both have to want it to work. And then anything can be overcome, even those nasty Saturn and Pluto aspects. And Mars. This is Frankie Lynch. Please, please, please like and subscribe. Watch my other videos and visit me at frankielynch.com. I love you.